Alright, so how much does it really cost to become an F1 driver? From your first laps in karting all the way up to Formula 2, how much money does it really take? Do you really need to spend tens of millions, or can you do it without getting into crippling debt? We'll be breaking down the cost of each step of the ladder to get into Formula 1. So with that said, let's get into it. Pretty much every F1 driver starts in karting. Lewis Hamilton started when he was 8 years old, and Max Verstappen started when he was 4 years old. So this is really where the journey begins for most drivers. At first, karting really doesn't seem that expensive, but by the time you start racing competitively, the costs start flying on in. You can pick up a decent second-hand kart for around 2,500, but for a competitive high-quality car, you're looking at about 10 grand. And then just a single set of tyres is going to cost around £200, and you're going to need multiple sets throughout the whole season. Then you've got race entry fees, fuel, mechanics, equipment, spare parts, transport, hotels. At this point, it no longer becomes a hobby, as most drivers are out there chasing the dream to get into Formula 1. Most weekends, drivers are out there racing. So by the time you add in all the costs together, you're looking at about £100,000 for one season. So let's say you start karting when you're about 7 years old. You can't even move into Formula 4 until you're 15. That's roughly 8 seasons in a kart before you can even make the step up to a proper single-seater car. So that means before you've even reached one of the junior formulas, you're already looking as if you spent about £800,000. This is actually then one of just the cheapest stages before getting into Formula 1. So Formula 4 is the first step where drivers actually get to race single-seater cars. Unlike Formula 2 and Formula 3, F4 doesn't actually follow along with the F1 season. However, instead it's more national championships like British F4, Spanish F4, or even Italian F4. A good competitive season in F4 will cost around £500,000. The championship fee alone is £25,000, and then the teams recommend a huge amount of testing before and during the season, which then adds roughly another £100,000 to the total cost. Tyres compared to karting are now way more expensive, with now being about £1,000 per set. Every mistake as well, the drivers have to pay for. Every crash and repair that has to get done to the car, the drivers have to pay for as well. Even something as simple as a front wing will be about £2,500. So the cost for an entire repair to the car after a crash is ridiculous. By the end of the F4 season, the total cost already is about £1.3 million. This is just the beginning, and drivers are still nowhere near reaching Formula 1. Alright, quickly, before we get into the rest of the video, this is a new channel, so if you could just subscribe and like, that would be greatly appreciated. But with that said, let's get back into it. So next comes Formula Regional. This championship sits in between F3 and F4, and the competitiveness takes another step up. Drivers race across entire regions like Europe, the Middle East and Asia, and the competition gets much tougher. Some drivers will even race in more than one Formula Regional championship across the year to try gain that vital experience. This also helps them maximise their track time and for the chance to get noticed by teams higher up. So one of the most important championships, as many drivers use this to try gain as many super license points as possible, which they'll need for getting into F1. And then, just like every step before it, the price goes up. So for a competitive Formula Regional Championship, it's going to cost about £1 million, and this is just to race in either Europe or Asia or the Middle East. So by the time you add in the fact that drivers race in more than one of these series, the cost is crazy. That then pushes the running total up to about 3.3 million, and yet there's still such a long way to go. So Formula 3 is where it starts to actually feel as if you're getting much closer to F1. For the first time in their careers, drivers will get to race on the same weekend as were the Formula 1 races. This means that they get to race on some of the most famous and iconic tracks around the world, performing right in front of the F1 teams. That exposure for drivers is great, however it does come with a much bigger price tag. A seat at one of the top teams like Prema or High Tech can cost about £1.5 million. Even some of the less experienced teams further down the field are going to cost about £1 million for the drive, and that's before adding in the cost of testing, travel, accommodation, and then all the extra costs which come into racing internationally. That means that the total investment at the moment is now sitting about £5.3 million. Drivers are so close to getting to achieve their dream of being in Formula 1. However, the most expensive step for them is still to come. So then, on to Formula 2, which is the final hurdle for drivers before getting into F1. At this point, they're just one great season away from potentially earning that dream of getting to drive in F1. The level of competition at this stage is incredibly high because all the drivers are fighting for the same handful of opportunities. Also, the most expensive part in their journey. Just the cost of securing a seat can be anywhere from about 2 million all the way up to 3 million. Then once again, you have the costs of testing, traveling, accommodation, all these costs once again. Once everything is added together, a season in F2 can cost about £5 million. And then even with spending all of that money, there still isn't the guaranteed chance you get to make it onto the F1 grid. Sometimes talent alone isn't enough and you need a really strong financial backing. Take for example Nicholas Latifi. His dad's company provided a major sponsorship all the way through his F1 career. Or there's Lance Stroll, whose dad basically paid for a seat at Williams, and now he's bought a whole F1 team just for his son to race. Lewis Hamilton's dad worked 3 jobs to support him all the way through his karting career. A massive advantage could also be getting signed to an F1 driver academy. Academies which are set up by the F1 teams like the Ferrari, Red Bull or Mercedes can be used to help cover a big chunk of the driver's costs. So then some examples of drivers who've come through driver academies. You've got Charles Leclerc with Ferrari, Kimi Antonelli with Mercedes most recently, and then Lewis Hamilton with McLaren. He got signed when he was just 13 years old, and less than a decade later he went on to go win his first world championship back in 2008 with the team. So then, how much does it really cost to become an F1 driver? If you're paying for every step by yourself, you're looking realistically about over £10 million. So then that is why getting into F1 isn't just about talent and luck, it's also about having such a huge financial backing. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe for more future F1 content, and then let me know in the comments what I should cover next. But with all of that said, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.